The following video seminar is for the new First Strike 4-mode 3-position full auto trigger group module, or for short, the full auto module. This is Brian Sullivan for First Strike. Do not attempt any installation or adjustment of this module until you watch the entire video completely. Included in the packaging are 4 components: the main module assembly, a 3-position selector, a new longer buffer cushion, and a new bolt assembly. Before attempting to install the full auto module into the T15, make sure to remove any air source and, of course, the magazine. First, let's go through the procedure of removing the semi-auto trigger group. To do this, it's easiest to just completely remove the upper receiver assembly. First, remove the 2 takedown pins, both the forward and the rear, by pushing out from the opposite side with any kind of a device that does not leave any kind of marks or dents. Then completely remove the upper assembly. Now we're going to be removing the selector. To do this, slightly turn the selector toward the safe position about 45 degrees. Let's call it just in the middle or so. Now, with another fairly safe surface, such as something to push out the selector, you're going to be wanting to apply a lot of pressure with your thumb or wooden dowel or even the back of a Sharpie pen. And at the same time, you're going to be slightly turning the selector as you push the selector out. Now we're going to be concentrating on the 2 pins, both the rear and the middle pin, pushing those out to remove the semi-auto trigger group. I feel it's a good practice to always work the pins that you're installing and keeping both the semi or any other module in the system from the right to the left in the same way that the takedown pins are done. It's just a good idea to keep the orientation somewhat the same so that you're always pushing things from the left to the right. At this point, you can safely remove the semi-auto trigger group completely. Now we're going to be covering a lot of topics on the full auto module assembly in lubrication, a lot of the do's and don'ts, and what to keep in mind as far as a regular maintenance regimen. First, keep in mind the 2 most important things. The adjustment screw is never to be completely removed from the assembly. Doing so would completely remove the friction patch, which needs to stay integral with the unit so that as the adjustments are made, there is a constant friction maintained on the adjustment screw. Completely removing this screw will destroy the friction element. Next, you should never attempt to disassemble any of the full auto module assembly until you're completely familiar with all of the characteristics. We will be providing a maintenance video showing you to the point of proper disassembly that you can remove componentry, but you do have to leave this at a certain point of assembly without further disassembling this crucial hydraulic damper element. Once again, it is just best to not try to attempt to disassemble this module. First, there's one thing that you should be very conscious of. There are 3 cross pins in the unit. The center cross pin, as you see here, is kept in place while the pin's spring is depressing down onto it. So you may handle the unit. Be cautious that this spring does not come out, and also while it's going in and out of the T15, that make sure your eyes are always on this pin. While you're lubricating or performing general maintenance, this pin may fall out as it's intended to. There are free surfaces all around the pin, and it's meant to rotate to expose nice free surfaces onto the sear while in function. So again, keep your eye on this pin. Always make sure before inserting into the T15 that this pin is present. Let's get started with the first steps before installing the unit into the T15. Lubrication. The first thing that you should do is spray the unit with good lubricants such as a thicker bodied silicone, Triflow, even break-free is fine. You can think of this assembly as a real steel component and not a pneumatic device. Please always be aware that the T15 is an air device, and only the surfaces that are exposed to high pressure air should be exposed to air lubricants such as lightweight silicones or specific pneumatic lubricants that your dealer can supply you with. So first give a good spray all throughout the unit and then blow it off or wipe it off so that no excess is dripping through the unit, but don't be afraid to make everything nice and wet with lubricant. Next, we're going to talk about a couple of the key points. Specifically, wheel bearing grease should be used in this area, and we call this part the pawl. So here, before installing the unit, be sure and put a nice amount of wheel bearing grease or something sufficiently, lithium grease or other things that are high load bearing grease in this area. And it's also good to do it in this area on both sides, in here of the sear reciprocating slot on both sides. Be sure to lubricate this area approximately every 2,000 rounds or so. We'll talk about a couple of other key installation points after installation into the unit. Lower the trigger module into the trigger module area. These next steps are pretty important as to the general order of things to avoid frustration. First, you're going to be installing the rear pin. And again, it's always best to think of things from right to left. So first, with pressure on the top area near the sear, you're going to be pushing this rear pin in and making sure that the holes are lined up as you apply pressure. Then you're going to be pushing in the front pin. Doing so at the same time pushing the front down as there's some spring tension in the adjustment area. Next, we're going to be dealing with components in the upper receiver assembly. First, slightly counterclockwise rotate the rear cap and remove. Remove the spring and with your fingers remove the existing cushion. Take the longer cushion supplied and install. Now we're going to be removing the bolt. Install the new bolt, the one with the O-ring, into the upper receiver assembly. Make sure to put the spring over the rear cap assembly and install. Slightly turn clockwise, and that's it for the upper assembly. And now for a very important lubrication step. This is the sear catch point on the striker, and this is another area to every 2,000 rounds or so. Always pay attention to lubricating with something like wheel bearing grease or lithium grease. Only a small amount is necessary. Now we're going to talk about a very important startup step, one of the very first things done in the full auto module that you will never really have to do again. It's just to break it up, break it in its very first stages. Take a 5/64 Allen wrench with the short side going down into this area, which is the adjustment area of the full auto module. What you're going to want to do is to slightly rotate, no more than about an eighth of a turn, clockwise and then back again counterclockwise. What this does is it breaks the tension on the friction patch so that any further adjustment that you're going to be doing is a lot easier. At this point, we're going to be putting the 3-position selector into place. What you're going to want to do is have the selector angle as you're putting it in about 45 degrees, somewhere between the semi-auto position and the safe position. As you're putting it in, twist back and forth a little bit as you're applying pressure, and it should snap into place. At this point, you're going to want to put a little bit of that wheel bearing grease also on the very front of the sear. Install the upper assembly, locating the front pin area and pushing it in. Rotating the upper receiver completely down into place, and with firm pressure downward, push in the rear pin. At this point, make sure the unit's on safe. That's with the selector position rearward. Then put the air on. And it's always a good idea to make sure that the gun is cocked before putting the air into your air source area. Now we're ready for the startup procedure of the module. Keeping any projectiles out of the unit and making sure that the magazine is not in place, turn the selector to the semi-auto position, which is vertically down. Take a few shots in this mode and make sure that the gun is cycling properly. Go ahead and take quite a few, maybe as much as 50 shots in this particular position before attempting to rotate to full auto. Now, before attempting to rotate the selector to full auto, please note the following. The module has been shipped with the adjustment in an area where it will function. The firing rate is undetermined, as every unit is different in the relationship of how the upper receivers are relating to the lower receivers. But it will fire at a firing rate which is unpredictable. That firing rate may be anywhere from 8 rounds per second to as many as 18 or 20 rounds per second. That is not important at this point, and that's what the following set of instructions are very important to take note of. As stated in the first part of this video, the module is a 3-position yet 4-mode device. That means that in safe, the unit does not fire and is securely locked out. In semi, it is 1 firing or cycle per trigger pull. In full auto, there are 2 modes in full auto. With just a slight pull rearward of the trigger, you will get 1 semi-auto shot. This is not something that's difficult to attain, and it's not difficult to learn. You pick up on it pretty quickly. That just with a little bit of pressure, not pulling all the way back, it's easy to fire a semi-auto shot no matter what the firing rate. The unit can be adjusted all the way down to approximately 8 or 9 balls per second and easily up to 18 or more cycles per second if desired. But first, let's talk about the startup procedure. Having the unit facing a very safe direction, turn the selector to the full auto position, and now make a slight pull so that you only get 1 shot, then release forward, and then do subsequent semi-auto shots. When you're comfortable, go ahead and take a firm rearward pull of the trigger to engage or experience full auto. In full auto, be sure at this point to only take a few short bursts. You're going to be experiencing a different firing rate in different guns. So if it's very, very fast or very, very slow, this is the adjustment phase. Now to adjust the firing rate, you can keep the upper receiver on As far as the first pin remaining in place and only removing the rear pin so that you can go back and forth in experiencing different adjustment firing rates and just rotating the upper receiver assembly up and down. You're going to be using your 5/64 Allen key, placing it in this hole, and if the firing rate is too fast, turn it counterclockwise to slow it down. If the unit needs to be faster, you're going to be turning it clockwise. Think of it just like a volume knob. Always only make very small adjustments with the Allen key, never more than 1/8 of a turn at a time. So again, clockwise makes it go faster, counterclockwise makes it go slower. In this initial phase of adjustment, you're going to be doing this 2 or 3 times of making adjustments, rotating the unit back down into place, applying the air source, rotating into select fire, full auto position, and gauging your firing rate and performing the sequence again. Your target for your first full auto firing experiences should be set between 13 and 14 rounds per second. After you achieve this rate, load a magazine and fire 2 to 3 round bursts and no more for your first experiences. Also, be sure to check with the restrictions at your firing facility or your RSO for the maximum rounds allowed in succession at that facility. Also, a quick note for projectiles. If you have the intention of only firing first strike projectiles, look into a dedicated spring that was tailored to firing first strike rounds at a high rate of fire, available at most dealers. To determine your firing rate, there are a few phone apps out there if you do not have something like a ProTac chronograph that is able to record full auto rates of fire, but on both iPhones and on Androids, look for applications readily available that are called BPS meter. They're both on Android and iPhone. It should be fairly easy to find. They work very, very well and come within about 5% of the professional chronographs and shot timers. It's very important to note that regarding the full auto mode, it's easy to replace the selector with the semi-auto selector, 2-position only of safe and semi, if your facilities only require full, semi-auto only. So please check with your facility, RSO, or other establishment before attempting to make an assumption that you are allowed to perform full auto on that facility. This is Brian Sullivan, First Strike. You should be getting many, many, many thousands of full auto cycles with this device. Again, use common sense when it comes to a good regimen of maintenance and lubrication, and this should perform quite well throughout the life of your unit.